Well, good morning. Despite the sort of jack of all trades apparent, at the moment my research focuses particularly on the strategic use of IT and the contribution of IT to productivity. But there's an alternative stream, so there are two streams, and the second stream is the dark side of IT. And that encompasses all sorts of aberrant behaviour that is prompted by IT and online usage. So today, particularly what we're going to talk about is what is and what is not acceptable and unacceptable behaviour amongst the youth. And the whole idea of studying the youth is that not only will they become the leaders of society and the leaders of business, but it's very interesting to see apparently behaviour online doesn't always accord with behaviour offline. And one needed to know actually what underpinned that. And in uncovering that, what we also discovered were that privacy was not something that you can section off and just explore one-on-one, just as a little box. It's influenced by a number of other things. And a further thing that we discovered was that you have to ask the right questions in order to unveil exactly what is prompting things. So we didn't only look at the behaviour, we actually tried to determine what exactly was driving that behaviour. And I think this is a very important thing to consider when introducing legislation or any sorts of policies in this regard. So we'll start off with the definition of a social networking site. Now, this is from 2007, but it's a very comprehensive and very accurate definition of exactly what a site is. And notice, first of all, it's a construct of a public or a semi-public profile, okay, within a bounded system. Now, that is the perception. The perception is that a social networking site is bounded, and it's just that site. In fact, it's not. Okay, once it's there, it goes all over the world and has the potential to go all over the world. So often users embark or enroll on sites and become members, register, but they don't realize that it's not a bounded system. The second is to articulate a list of users, yes, and then to traverse and to view the various interactions. Well, it's nice to know what your friends are getting up to and your friends, but exactly who are your friends? So we'll explore a little bit further about that later on. Essentially, social networking sites have lots and lots of benefits, and particularly the youth seek those benefits. Now, when one sort of considers youth go up to 21 years of age, and they can start quite young and they go up, and there's a lot of transition going on, particularly in the later teens and up to 21. And that is when we were, that was an era that we were very interested in, because that's when they transitioned from being children, as it were, and at school, to being young professionals. Sometimes they go through university, sometimes, or further institutions of education, but it's actually transitioning into the work environment. So the awareness of their different persona become very, very obvious to them. We looked at this from social cognitive theory. Now, it sounds involved, but there were two theories that particularly drove us, and the one was herding behaviour, where very often the mass herds, they do what others do, simply because it's an easy decision-making tool. Okay, what others do must be right. And another reason for herding is to rather be with the crowd than stand out. Because if you stand out, much as people like to think that they're unique and individual, if they stand out, then they get identified and ostracized potentially. Okay? And then the other behavior was mimetic theory, whereby we tend to copy those that we want to be like. And this copying goes on to such a point that eventually our heroes or our idols become the target of us wanting to actually tear them down. Now, this is very evident with film stars and politicians. We idolize them and mimic them to a point, and then we want to actually tear them down. It's some perversity in human nature. So, our research objectives were to essentially determine what is acceptable behaviour and what is unacceptable behaviour on social networking sites, and whether there's a difference between what they do online and what they do offline. Just briefly, the methodology, it was qualitative. It was an exploratory phase, and youth aged between 18 to 20, through a good mix of males and females, and some were students, some were working part-time, and some were working full-time. Now, our findings, and this was interesting. Acceptable behaviour, yes, had to be respectful, polite, and it was audience dependent. So you were far more respectful to your family, and particularly senior members of your family, and you were far more flippant with your friends, etc. Sometimes anything went, and this was particularly the males who said so. We'll just post anything, and indicated they're possibly gender dependent, and there's a tolerance of others' postings. So there tends to be passivity in online social media. So if you see something that you don't quite agree with, you wait and see what others' response is to it. And if others all jump on it, then you'll jump on it too. But if nobody says anything, then you rather don't say anything. And then you've got to act professionally. Now, this is reflective of the sudden awareness of this group, becoming aware of the fact that they're now entering the workforce and they need to behave in a certain way in order to be promoted or impress their bosses, and so on and so forth. Now, this is interesting. The findings with regard to unacceptable behaviour, rude or offensive postings. Okay, now these were people who were asked specifically, what do you find unacceptable? Okay, rude or offensive things, embarrassing postings. So while people love to look at titillating sort of pictures, they don't think it's really proper to post those. So there's sort of an ambiguity there. Coarse language and too much and too intimate detail about relationships, particularly, about what you and your husband did that night and in the bedroom, etc. So people don't like that. Now, the second part of this, the second half of that list, that information was uncovered by asking things in a different way. We asked them what positive experiences they'd had, but what negative experiences they had had. Now, note what came to the fore there. Unprofessional content, okay, that was audience dependent. Breaching others' privacy. Now, that had not come to the fore when you talk about unacceptable behaviour, okay? It came to the fore with regard to unpleasant experiences. And all the others that follow actually hang on that. Randomly requesting friendship, okay? Pestering friends, and stalking. Now, actually pestering friends goes back to how they define their friends online, because you have friends, is time? No. Okay, you have friends that you really like, and then you have sort of acquaintances, and then you have friends, and there's the obligation online to befriend your friends, because there's the relationship with your friend that you want to maintain. So there is that awkwardness there, and people don't like that. It infringes their privacy and who they can choose to be their friend, but they don't want to offend people. So there are all sorts of obscure underlying nuances going on here. Just looking at the differences between online and offline behaviour, just because you've got the computer screen, you've got the safety net. You're actually talking to them. So if you feel uncomfortable with the conversation, you can just connect or disappear, and you never see them again. But if you're face-to-face, you can't escape that easily. You've also got that social decorum to follow. And to follow on with this, people often felt, well, they don't see the hurt in people's eyes. So once a screen is there, it's almost as though it's a protective screen. So they can do what they want to. And in addition, there's the time in which to consider exactly how you will respond to people and exactly what you'll say. And once there is that, once you detect that sort of behavior and people are targeting someone else, then it's sort of like a mass frenzy. It's a smelling blood, as it were. If you've been avoiding saying something, you could say it online, not necessarily publicly. Now, here's a conflict. Of course it's public, but they don't see it as public. Okay? And it could be easier that way. So it's almost well, I'll say it, I'll put it out there, and maybe it's easier to say something with the screen in front of me. Something about how they determined what was acceptable and what was unacceptable behavior was to watch others. Okay? So they looked and first of all saw what sort of behavior went on, what was accepted, okay? What did not give rise to any objection. Okay, so if it was accepted, yes, that's fine. Then I'll do it too. Okay, so you copy others. Another way of doing it was to try it, little bit, try it and test it and see what reaction there was. Bearing in mind that people don't typically complain a lot about people's behavior on social media, typically. And then they were guided by what they knew was acceptable and what they knew was unacceptable in real life. Okay? Now the issue arose, okay, they were quite vociferous in what they found unacceptable, but how did they know what was acceptable? And possibly one of the main reasons is that because many of our behaviors are guided by norms, rules, laws, regulations that tell you what not to do. Even the religious tenets tell you don't do this, don't do that, don't do the next thing. There are few that tell you what is acceptable and how to do it. And certainly the youth, I think there's a greater awareness that's growing, but they think this is our online environment, our little safe environment, our entity, where we can, number one, create our own identity and our own profile, and number two, interact with people. So they can manage, they feel that they can manage their own profile online. So the acceptability is really just looking to see in their community what seems to be accepted. They're far clearer on what is not acceptable. So Facebook, a second point there, Facebook activity requires cognizance of the multi-audience nature of such a social medium, because not only do you have your friends, you also have your professional colleagues, and you can distinguish between the different groups, but how do you know things are not going to leak? Okay? And things do, and they switch between your different audiences, and you cannot control it. Once it's out there, it's out there. Acceptability was typically assessed from the first person perspective. In other words, what the respondent would do and would not do. Okay? So they said, I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do that. Not people shouldn't do this and people shouldn't do that. They just think from their own perspectives. So, control over others is difficult once out there. You have the online befriending obligation. This is a really important thing. Because you feel that if you don't, you'll jeopardize your relationships. There's a lack of clarity regarding acceptable behavior and protection of the computer screen. There's the freedom that comes with that. There's the safety that comes with that. Time to consider your response. And also that protection, that screen seems to give you a protection to say what you want and what you feel is honest. And sometimes it might be honest in the heat of the moment, but in reflection later on it might not seem so honest, might seem heat-provoked. And then there's a carelessness. There's a lot of risky behaviour amongst the youth because they want to impress their colleagues and their friends. So there are certainly implications for the users, okay, for parents and teachers. Okay. It's more a matter of educating them into the appropriate behaviour patterns and inappropriate behaviour. Policymakers can guide, but it's corralling behaviour that has already become instilled. Okay. Managers, certainly managers of organisations, can give a very clear steer, and marketers too, can be very clear on exactly what they would find acceptable and not acceptable on their sites. Points to ponder, and certainly future research for us. If we're more free online, why accept unappealing friendship requests? Okay, there's a perversity and a paradox there. If we're judged by our friends, why accept unappealing friendship requests? You know, Facebook whores, if you say you've got lots and lots of friends, you get the tipping point, you've got too many, and then you're a Facebook whore. Do different behavioural norms apply for ourselves than for others? I can do this, but others mustn't do it to me. Okay? So I'll leave you with those points to ponder, but thank you very much indeed.